The stranger in the snow. The wind howled like a hungry beast outside the small wooden cabin. Snow hit the windows hard, and the world outside was covered in thick white. Eli sat near the fire, warming his hands. He had lived alone on this frozen planet for 5 years. It was quiet here. No people, no noise, just snow and silence. Eli liked it that way. He took a sip of hot tea and looked out the frosted window. Everything was white, empty, cold. But then, something moved. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks. But no, there it was again, a dark shape in the snow. Eli stood up, heart beating fast. He grabbed his coat and opened the door. The wind hit him hard, cold, and sharp like knives. He stepped outside, boots crunching in the snow. The shape was close now. It was a person, or something like one. It stumbled, then fell face first into the snow, just a few meters from his cabin. Eli rushed forward. When he reached the body, he gasped. It was a woman, but not human. Her skin was pale blue, almost glowing. Strange silver lines ran across her cheeks and arms. Her clothes were torn, and her hands were bleeding. She was unconscious, her lips purple from the cold. Eli looked around. No one else was there, just her. Without thinking, he lifted her up. She was light, too light, as if her bones were hollow. He carried her into the cabin and laid her gently near the fire. "Who are you?" he whispered, but she didn't answer. He removed her wet coat and covered her with a thick blanket. Her skin felt like ice. He checked her pulse. Still alive, but weak. She suddenly coughed and whispered something in a strange language. Her eyes opened halfway. They were bright green, like emeralds, glowing in the firelight. "Safe," she whispered. "Please, hide me." Then she passed out again. Eli sat back, heart pounding. What just happened? Who was this woman? What was she? He stared at her glowing skin and strange markings. She didn't look dangerous, but she didn't look safe either. Still, she was freezing, hurt, and alone. He had to help her. He boiled water and cleaned the wounds on her arms. As he worked, she moved slightly, breathing heavy. Her body trembled. Whatever happened to her, it was bad. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. After a while, she calmed down. Her breathing became slow and steady. Eli sat back and watched the fire. The storm outside was getting worse. No one could survive out there now. Not even someone like her. He looked at her again. Her face was calm, peaceful, but her body was still tense, like she was ready to run or fight at any moment. Suddenly, the lights in the cabin flickered. Eli frowned. That only happened when there was interference, like something flying nearby. He walked to the window and looked out into the storm. Nothing but snow. But he had a strange feeling, like eyes were watching from the dark. He turned back to the woman. She was still asleep, but now her hand was glowing. A soft blue light pulsed from her palm. Eli stepped closer. Her fingers curled tight, as if holding something invisible. Then she whispered again, eyes still closed. "They're coming." His stomach dropped. Who was coming? And why was she here? He backed away, unsure what to think. Maybe he should send a signal to the nearby outpost. But something told him not to. Something told him this woman, this alien, was not safe outside. Something told him she needed him. Eli sat down again, watching the storm rage outside, the fire crackling inside, and the strange, beautiful woman sleeping near his feet. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. His quiet life was over, and something big, something dangerous, had just begun. Who is she? The storm outside kept howling. Snow slammed against the walls of the cabin like fists. But inside, the fire burned warm, and the strange woman slept quietly, wrapped in thick blankets, her breathing slow and deep. Eli sat in the corner of the room, staring at her. He had questions. Too many. Who was she? Where did she come from? And who were the people she said were coming? Her glowing skin, her strange words, and that light from her palm. It didn't feel normal. It didn't feel human. Eli had seen many things during his time on the outer planets. Pirates, traders, soldiers, smugglers, but never someone like her. He stood up slowly and checked the door. Locked. Then he went to the window. Nothing but snow. He walked back to the woman. As he reached down to check her temperature again, her eyes snapped open, wide and glowing. Before Eli could react, she grabbed his wrist. Hard. Her grip was strong. Unnaturally strong. "Where am I?" she said, her voice low but clear. "You're safe," Eli said slowly. "You collapsed outside my cabin. In the snow." She looked around, confused. Her eyes scanned the room, her body tense like a cornered animal. "I brought you inside. You were freezing. I gave you blankets and treated your wounds," Eli added, trying to sound calm. She didn't let go of his wrist. Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" Eli raised an eyebrow. "Because you were dying." She studied his face, as if trying to read his thoughts. Then, slowly, she released his hand. She sat up, wincing in pain. Her body shook slightly as she looked at her arms, bandaged with cloth. Her skin still glowed faintly, but the color was duller now. She seemed weaker than before. "Do you have a name?" Eli asked gently. She didn't answer. She looked away, eyes staring into the fire. "Look," he said, "I don't know what happened to you. But whoever you're running from, they didn't find you. You're safe here. For now." She turned back to him. "They will come." Her voice was filled with fear. Eli frowned. "Who are they?" She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "Hunters." Eli's chest tightened. He'd heard that word before. On some planets, people used it to describe bounty hunters or trackers. People who chased others down, no matter how far they ran. But the way she said it, it sounded worse. Like these hunters were not just after money. "What do they want?" Eli asked. She looked into the fire again. "They want me back." "Why?" She hesitated. Then she stood up, shakily. "I can't stay here," she said suddenly. "I have to go." She took 2 steps and collapsed. Eli rushed forward and caught her before she hit the ground. "You're in no condition to leave," he said firmly. She shook her head. "They'll track me. Your place is not safe." "You're hurt," Eli replied. "You won't last 5 minutes out there in this storm." She looked up at him, her glowing eyes softening just a little. "Then you'll die because of me." Eli helped her back onto the bed. "I've lived in worse situations. If they come, I'll deal with it." "You don't understand," she said, almost angry. "They're not human. They don't care about life. They only follow commands. I am. I'm a failed asset to them. A broken tool. They won't stop." That made Eli pause. Failed asset. Broken tool. He sat beside her, arms crossed. "Tell me what you are." She looked down, ashamed. "I was made, not born. Engineered for a special program on my homeworld. We were trained to be loyal. To serve. No feelings. No choices." She took a deep breath, shaking. But something changed. Something inside me. I began to think. To feel. I began to want. Freedom. She looked at him again. "And for that, they marked me. Hunted me." Eli stayed silent for a moment. This was more than he expected. He thought she might have been a soldier or refugee. But this was darker. She wasn't just running from a war. She was running from her creators. "What's your name?" he asked again. She hesitated. "Sira." "Sira," he repeated. "I'm Eli." She nodded slowly. "Thank you for not letting me die." He smiled slightly. "You're welcome." But the moment of calm didn't last. Suddenly, the power flickered again. The lights dimmed, and a low humming sound came from outside. Syra's body tensed. She sat up fast. "No," she whispered. "No, no, they're here." Eli jumped up and grabbed his coat. "What do you mean?" Syra grabbed his arm. "Shut everything off. No power. No signals. Now." Eli didn't ask questions. He ran to the controls and turned off the generator. The lights went out. The fire was the only thing left glowing. Then silence. Thick, heavy, scary. They both crouched low. Outside, something moved past the window. A shadow. Slow, tall, not human. Syra covered her mouth, eyes wide with fear. Eli's heart beat hard in his chest. Whatever was out there, it was real. And it was hunting her. The shadow paused at the door. Syra grabbed Eli's hand. "Don't move," she whispered. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then the shadow moved away and disappeared into the storm. Syra let go of his hand. Her body was shaking. Eli stood up slowly. "What was that?" he asked. She didn't answer. But now he understood. This wasn't just a strange meeting in a storm. This was war. And he was in the middle of it, a warning in the ice. The next morning, the storm had slowed, but the cold remained sharp. The snow outside was thick and heavy, hiding the land like a white blanket. Eli stood by the window, watching the endless ice. He didn't sleep at all that night. He couldn't. Not after what he saw. Not after the shadow outside his cabin. Syra sat near the fire, silent. She looked better today, less pale, more steady. But she was still weak, and her eyes looked haunted, like she had seen things no one should ever see. Eli made tea, then handed her a cup. She took it with shaking hands. "Thank you." He nodded, then sat down across from her. They were quiet for a long time. Finally, Eli spoke. "You said they're not human. What are they?" Syra looked into the fire. "They were made long before I was. Machines, mixed with living tissue. No hearts. No minds. Just commands. Hunters. That's all they know." Eli leaned forward. "They followed you here?" She nodded. "Yes. Once I broke free from the program, they sent them after me, one by one. Every planet, every station. And now, here." Eli frowned. "This world is dead. No cities, no signals, just snow and rock. Why come here?" "I thought I'd be safe," she said. "No one would follow me this far. But they don't stop. Not until they finish the mission." Her voice was cold, like the snow outside. Eli stood up and began to pace. "I saw one of them last night, just outside. He was scanning the cabin." Syra nodded, but he didn't attack. "No, he left." "That means he didn't find me," she said. "Yet." Eli turned to face her. "Then we still have time." She shook her head. "Not much." He moved to the window again. The ice was quiet now. Peaceful. But Eli knew that peace was a lie. Suddenly, Syra gasped. Eli spun around. She was staring at the far wall, eyes wide. "What is it?" She stood up fast and rushed to the door. "Wait," Eli called, grabbing his coat. But Syra opened the door and stepped out barefoot into the snow. "Are you crazy?" he shouted, pulling on his boots and running after her. The cold slapped his face like a whip. He followed her down a small hill near the cabin. And then he saw it. In the snow, carved deep, were strange glowing symbols. Circular marks. Lines that pulsed with blue light. It was like someone, or something, had burned a message into the ice. Syra dropped to her knees and touched the marks. Her body glowed the same color. "What does it say?" Eli asked, breathing hard. She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "They found me." Eli looked around, suddenly feeling very exposed. "They don't write," Syra continued. "Not like this. This This is a warning. To me. What kind of warning? She stood up. They're giving me one last chance to return. If I don't, they destroy everything around me. Eli's eyes narrowed. Including me. She looked away. Yes. The snow around the symbols began to melt, as if the ground itself couldn't hold their power. We need to get back inside, Eli said. But Syrah didn't move. They will come tonight, she said. They always come after the third warning. This is the second. Third? Eli asked. When was the first? She looked at him. The night before you found me. I saw a light in the sky. A red signal. I knew they were close. Eli felt a chill go down his back. And not from the cold. He took her hand gently. Come on. We need to prepare. They returned to the cabin and locked the door behind them. Inside, Syrah drew strange shapes on the walls using charcoal from the fire. These are shields, she said. They might block some scans. Eli grabbed a scanner from his drawer and checked the air. The readings were normal. No movement, no signals. But deep inside, he felt uneasy, like something was waiting, watching. Later that evening, the skies turned purple. A strange light danced across the clouds. At first, Eli thought it was just the aurora again. But Syrah stood up fast. No, she said, that's not the aurora. Outside, a hum filled the air. Low and steady. Then, a beam of red light shot down from the sky and lit up the snow just a few meters from the cabin. Eli ducked. Syrah grabbed his hand. We have to go under. Eli nodded and opened the hatch to his hidden crawlspace. It was small, just big enough for two. They climbed in and shut the hatch tight. From below, they listened. The hum grew louder. Heavy footsteps echoed above. Eli held his breath. Something was inside the cabin now. Wood creaked. Glass broke. Furniture moved. Then, silence. A long pause. A mechanical voice spoke. Subject detected. Order. Return or be erased. Time remaining. 3 cycles. Then the footsteps moved again. Out the door. And vanished. Eli waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. Then he opened the hatch. The cabin was wrecked. Chairs smashed. Table broken. Food spilled. But the creature was gone. Syrah climbed out beside him, her face pale. They don't bluff, she said. Next time, they bring fire. Eli looked out the broken window at the glowing sky. This wasn't just a warning. It was the beginning of a countdown. And time was running out. The hunters arrived. The next morning, the wind was gone, but the air felt heavier, like the sky itself was watching. The snow lay silent, untouched, except for the strange symbols still glowing faintly where the message had been burned into the ice. Eli worked quietly, repairing what he could. He fixed the shattered window with scrap metal and insulated cloth. The cabin still smelled like burnt wood and melted circuits. The intruder hadn't spoken much, but the warning was clear. They were coming. And this time, they wouldn't leave without blood. Syrah sat near the fire, eyes distant. She hadn't spoken since they left the crawlspace. Her hands were still shaking. She was afraid, but not just for herself. For him. Eli noticed. You're thinking about running again, aren't you? He said softly. She looked up, guilty. I should. If I stay, you die. You're not leaving, Eli said firmly. You don't understand. No, you don't, he interrupted. This is my home. I've fought for it before. I'll do it again. You didn't ask for help, but I gave it. Now I'm not backing down. Syrah stared at him, surprised. Why? Eli sighed and looked into the fire. Because maybe you were made in a lab, but you feel more human than most people I've met. Syrah didn't answer. But for the first time, she smiled. A small, tired smile. But it was real. Later that day, they prepared. Eli gathered old weapons, some human-made, Some alien tech he'd scavenged over the years. A plasma shotgun, a pulse mine, a freezing trap. He charged the batteries and loaded the energy cells. Syrah moved quietly through the cabin, touching the walls, whispering in a language Eli didn't understand. She was activating something. Small marks on her skin began to glow again. "What are you doing?" Eli asked. "Waking up parts of myself," she said, pieces they tried to erase. Eli watched as her eyes flickered with power. For a moment, she looked dangerous, but still beautiful, like a storm waiting to be unleashed. That night, the sky turned dark blue, almost black. Then, they came. It started with a low thump, a sound that came from deep underground, like something massive had landed far away. Then another. Then silence. Syrah stood up. They're near. Eli peeked through the cracks in the patched window. 3 shapes emerged from the trees beyond the hill. They walked slowly, tall, armored, moving like machines. Each one was over 7 feet tall, with glowing red eyes and metal skin. Their arms ended in blades and cannons, not hands. "Hunters," Syrah whispered. Eli swallowed hard. "There's 3 of them." She nodded. "A trio unit, standard for high-level targets." He turned to her. "What happens if they take you back?" She didn't answer, but her eyes said enough. Death would be a mercy compared to what waited for her. Eli grabbed the shotgun and moved to the hatch. "We use the traps. We fight smart. We don't let them get close." Syrah followed. "I'll handle the first. You cover the second. If the third reaches the cabin, run." "I'm not running," Eli said. "Then we end this together." Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft at first, then heavier. The hunters spread out. One moved toward the cabin, while the other 2 circled the sides, scanning the ground. Their armor shimmered with red lights. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They were machines built for one thing: elimination. Eli triggered the freezing trap just as the first one stepped onto the front path. With a hiss, the ground exploded in cold mist. Ice crystals shot up, freezing the creature's legs mid-step. But it didn't stop. Its legs shattered the ice with brute force, and it kept walking. Slower, but relentless. Eli fired the shotgun. The plasma blast hit the hunter in the chest, sending it crashing backward into the snow. A loud mechanical growl echoed through the trees. The second hunter broke from cover and ran straight toward the cabin side. Syrah was already waiting. She jumped from the rooftop, spinning mid-air. Her hands glowed bright blue. She struck the creature's head, releasing a shockwave that cracked its armor. It stumbled, sparks flying from its joints. But then, its arm transformed into a blade. It slashed upward, cutting through the air. Syrah dodged, barely. Eli turned to help, but the third hunter was now at the door. It scanned the cabin, then punched through the wall with a loud crash. Wood splintered, metal bent. "Eli!" Syrah shouted. "I got it," he yelled back. He pulled the pulse mine from under the table and tossed it at the hunter's feet. A second later, boom! The blast sent the creature flying outside. Syrah grabbed a sharp metal rod and drove it into the second hunter's chest. It sparked, screamed, then collapsed. She turned to see Eli wrestling with the third, now half damaged but still dangerous. The hunter lifted Eli by the throat. Syrah screamed. No. Her entire body lit up. She moved faster than human eyes could follow. She crashed into the hunter, forcing it to drop Eli. Then she placed both her glowing hands on the machine's chest and whispered, "Shut down." The light pulsed. The hunter froze, twitching. Then it fell and didn't move again. Eli coughed, catching his breath. "Are you okay?" Syrah asked, dropping beside him. "Yeah, you?" She nodded. 2 dead, 1 missing. Eli frowned. The first one. They looked out into the snow. It was gone. Somewhere out there, still crawling, Still hunting. They repaired the cabin again, but now there was no pretending. No silence. No peace. Sarah sat by the fire once more, but her body leaned against Eli's, for warmth, for comfort, for something deeper she couldn't name yet. "You saved me," she whispered. "No," Eli replied. "We saved each other." And outside, buried deep beneath the snow, a red eye blinked. Still alive. Still watching. Still waiting. Trapped together. For 2 days, the snow did not stop falling. Thick, heavy flakes covered the land. The sky was white, the wind quiet, and the silence outside felt wrong. Not peaceful, not calm. Just waiting. Inside the cabin, Eli and Sarah worked in near silence. The walls were patched again, the fire kept burning, and the damaged machines were moved outside. What was left of the hunters? But the missing one, the first, was still out there. Hiding. Watching. Eli could feel it. He didn't know how, but something told him they weren't alone. Sarah felt it too. She barely slept. Every noise outside made her eyes snap open. Every creak of the wood, every howl of the wind made her body tense. They were trapped, not by walls, but by time. A countdown. Sarah had said it before. 3 warnings, 3 cycles. And now, there was only one left. Eli sat at the small wooden table, writing in his journal. He wrote every day, mostly to keep himself sane. But now his words felt heavier. Day 5. She's still here. We don't talk much. But when she looks at me, I feel something strange. Like I've known her longer than a few days. Like she's not just another guest. Like she's part of this place now. He paused, then wrote again. She says she's broken, but I've never seen anyone fight like that. If she's broken, then maybe I am too. He closed the book. Sarah stood by the window, staring at the white outside. "They'll come tomorrow," she said softly. Eli nodded. "You sure?" "I feel it." She touched her neck, where a small light had appeared beneath her skin. A signal. A timer. "Do you regret staying?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. Eli didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the fire, and stirred the flames with a metal rod. "No," he said, "I regret not knowing why you were really running." Sarah turned. He met her gaze. "You told me you escaped a program, that you were made, but you didn't say what they made you for." She looked down. Her voice dropped. "They made me to serve, to protect a commander. Not a human, but someone from their own world. I was bonded to him by force, trained to obey, but something inside me rejected it. I ran." Eli stepped closer. "So, you're not just being hunted. You're stolen property." She nodded. "They call me the lost tool, a mistake that needs correcting. But I don't want to go back to being a thing." Her eyes filled with pain. "I don't want to be a thing anymore." Eli stepped forward and gently touched her shoulder. "You're not a thing, Sarah. Not here. Not with me." She closed her eyes and leaned into his hand, just a little. And for the first time since arriving, she looked like someone who wanted to be seen. That night, they sat closer to each other near the fire. The snow outside was still falling, hiding the stars. Eli poured hot water into 2 cups and handed one to her. She took it with both hands. "Where did you learn kindness?" she asked him. Eli raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? You live alone, in a dead world, but you gave shelter to a stranger, a dangerous one. Why?" He smiled, gently. "Because kindness doesn't cost anything. And maybe I was just waiting for someone to need it." Sarah looked down at the cup. "I don't know how to be free," she said. "I don't know how to be anything but what they made me." "Then learn," Eli replied. "Here, with me, one day at a time." She stared at him, her glowing eyes soft. "What if I fail?" then I'll still be here. Later, Eli showed her his old music player. It barely worked, but one song played clearly, a soft, slow piano melody. Simple and human. Sira sat quietly, eyes closed, listening. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "It's old," Eli said, smiling. "But it helps." She turned to him. "I never heard music before." He looked at her in surprise. "Not even once." "No, only orders, instructions, training noise." She placed a hand over her chest. "But this, I feel something inside." "It's called emotion," Eli said. "Is it always this heavy?" He laughed gently. "Sometimes. Sometimes it's light. Sometimes it breaks you. But it's what makes us alive." She nodded slowly. "I want to feel more." That night, they didn't sleep in separate corners. The cold was strong, but the reason they sat closer was different now. Not for heat, but for each other. Sira rested her head on his shoulder. Her breathing was soft, her body calm. But her voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. "Eli, I think the bond is shifting." He looked down. "What bond?" "The one they forced into me. It was made to connect me to a commander. But now, something inside is changing. It's being pulled toward you." Eli's heart beat faster. "What does that mean?" She looked up into his eyes. "I don't know, but I don't want to fight it." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just wrapped his arm around her shoulder. And in that moment, they both understood. They were no longer strangers in a storm. They were two broken souls, holding each other together. But peace never lasts. The next morning, the snow stopped. The sky cleared. The sun returned. And with it came the sound. A deep, distant hum. Low. Slow. Getting closer. Sira stood up fast. "It's time." Eli grabbed his shotgun. "Are you ready?" She nodded. "Yes. But this time, it won't be a small team." "What are we facing?" he asked. Her voice turned cold. "The ones who built me." Outside, far across the frozen hills, the horizon shimmered. A black dot appeared in the sky. Then another. Then 5. They moved in perfect lines. Not ships. Not drones. Drop pods. Sira's face hardened. "They've sent a recovery unit." "How many?" She looked at him. "Too many." Eli stepped forward, loading his weapon. "Then we make them regret it." She smiled, only slightly, but it was real. "Together." He nodded. Together. The truth about her bond. The snow outside had stopped, but the sky had not yet cleared. The calmness felt like the eye of a storm. Eli and Sira stood at the cabin's broken window, staring out into the distance. The hum had returned, low, steady, and echoing across the frozen hills. The recovery unit was here. It wasn't just a search party. This was a full operation. Sira had known it. She had felt the pulse of the approaching pods. They weren't there for her alone. They were there to reclaim what had once been theirs. But they weren't expecting to face a man willing to protect her at any cost. Eli looked at Sira. Her face was pale but resolute. He could see her body trembling slightly, but her eyes were filled with a determination he hadn't seen before. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Once they find us, it's not going to be just a fight. It's going to be a war." She nodded without hesitation. "I've known this day would come. I just didn't think it would be with someone like you." Eli didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They both understood what the other was thinking. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't just a thing. She was a person, and Eli was going to make sure she stayed that way. The door creaked open, and they stepped outside. The wind was still cold, but the air was different, charged, almost alive. The first drop pod fell from the sky, crashing into the snow with a deep, earth-shaking boom. A second followed, and then a third. The air was thick with tension as the pods began to release their occupants, Dark armored figures, more machine than flesh, moving with precision, scanning everything in their path. "They're here," Sura whispered, her voice tight. "They won't stop until I'm back in their hands." Eli raised his shotgun, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to feel. Fear, maybe, but all he felt now was anger. Anger at them. For hunting her. For treating her like she was something to be collected and controlled. But she was more than that. She was more than any of them could ever understand. "Sira, stay behind me," he ordered. But she didn't move. "I have to stop them," she said quietly. "They won't leave until they have me." "No," Eli said firmly. "We stop them together." She looked at him, the faintest smile playing on her lips. "I knew you wouldn't run." Sira turned to face the snow-covered hills. The first soldier stepped out of the pod, its red eyes glowing brightly in the fading light. Sira's body tensed. "They're not just coming for me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They're coming for all of us. For everyone I've ever met." Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" They'd modified us," she continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "We weren't just made to serve. We were made to be weapons. To erase anyone who might try to stop them. I was supposed to be their perfect soldier, obedient, powerful, unstoppable." She clenched her fists, the blue markings on her arms glowing brighter. "I wasn't supposed to feel anything. I wasn't supposed to question orders." "Then why did you?" Eli asked softly, stepping closer to her. "Because I felt something when I saw you," she said quietly. "Something that was real. I didn't want to be a tool anymore. I wanted to be free. And now," her voice faltered, "and now they'll destroy everyone and everything around us to get me back," she finished. Eli felt his heart drop into his stomach. He had always known there was more to her story. But hearing her say it out loud made the reality hit him like a brick wall. Sira wasn't just running from a past she couldn't escape. She was running from a purpose they had programmed into her, a purpose that had nothing to do with being human. The soldiers began to spread out, their footsteps crunching in the snow like an approaching storm. Sira moved quickly, crouching behind a large rock, her body still glowing faintly. "You're not alone," Eli whispered, joining her. She turned her head to look at him, eyes wide with surprise. "What?" "You're not alone. Not anymore. I'll fight for you." Sira swallowed hard, her throat tight. "You don't understand. These soldiers, they're more than just machines. They have my code. They can control me. They can force me back, if they can just touch me." Eli grabbed her shoulders, locking eyes with her. "Not today. Not while I'm still breathing." Sira looked down at the ground, shaking her head. "I never asked you to fight. I never asked you to. No one asked me to. But I'll do it. I'll fight because I know you're worth saving." She didn't say anything for a moment, then slowly nodded. "Then let's make sure they don't take us without a fight." The soldiers moved closer, their weapons ready. Their scanners hummed as they closed in, but Eli and Sira were already preparing. Eli held the plasma shotgun in one hand, his other hand gripping a pulse grenade tightly. Sira's skin flickered with energy, a bright blue light surrounding her like an invisible shield. The first soldier lunged forward, its sword raised high. But before it could strike, Eli fired the shotgun, sending the soldier flying backward into a tree. Sparks flew, and it hit the ground with a heavy thud. The others paused for a moment, analyzing the situation. But the moment of hesitation passed. Sira moved faster than Eli had ever seen her move before, her body glowing brightly as she launched herself at another soldier. Her glowing hands met its chest, with a crackling shockwave, sending the soldier crashing into the ground, its body twitching as it tried to recover. But the third soldier was already charging toward them. "Eli!" Sira shouted, but Eli was already moving. He tossed the pulse grenade, and it exploded in a flash of blinding light, knocking the soldier off balance. It tried to regain its footing, but Sira was there, using her newfound power to rip its weapon from its hand and send it crashing into the snow. As the last soldier fell to the ground, Eli looked at Sira. She was breathing hard, her body glowing faintly. Her energy had dimmed a little, but her eyes were still sharp, still determined. "We did it," Eli said, a small smile tugging at his lips. But Sira shook her head. "No, we didn't. They'll send more." She stepped back, glancing over her shoulder at the distant horizon. "The others won't stop until they get what they came for. They'll never stop." Eli took a deep breath and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we don't stop either. We keep fighting. We don't let them take you back." Sira looked at him, a new fire burning in her eyes. "Together. Together," he repeated. And as they stood side by side, watching the sky darken once again, they knew the next battle was coming. The war had only just begun, but they had each other, and that would be enough. Her last stand. The wind picked up again as they stood in the clearing, watching the snow swirl around them. The sky was dark, almost black with clouds, but there was no time to wait for the storm to pass. The last of the drop pods had disappeared into the horizon, but they both knew it wasn't over. The hunters were regrouping. "They'll come," Sira said quietly, her voice filled with quiet certainty. She looked out at the vast, frozen expanse around them. "They won't give up. Not after what just happened." Eli turned to her, his expression hard but filled with a sense of resolve. "Then we make sure they never get close enough." They had fought back the first wave, 3 soldiers from the recovery unit, but they knew the next group would be larger, stronger, more relentless. "I won't let them take you," Eli said, his voice thick with conviction. Sira glanced at him. Her glowing blue eyes softened. "I don't want to lose you." "We won't lose," he said firmly. He took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against the chill. "We'll face them together. This is our fight, Sira. You're not their property anymore. You're free." She didn't answer right away. Her mind was still spinning with the truth. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for them both, for their future. "Eli," she said, her voice a whisper. "There's something I haven't told you." Eli looked at her, his brow furrowing in concern. "What is it?" "I never told you the full truth about my bond," she began, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The connection they put in me isn't just a command. It's a link. If they want to, they can control me, force me to do things I don't want to do." She paused, her body trembling. "And the bond doesn't just work for them. It works for me too. It connects us. But I can't feel it the same way they do." Eli took a step closer, reaching out for her. "Sira, you don't have to explain. We've already been through so much." But she shook her head. "I need you to understand. If they push me far enough, if they make me feel enough pressure, enough fear, the link will activate. They'll control me. And I'll have no choice but to obey." Eli's heart sank. I can't let that happen," she whispered. "I can't hurt you, Eli. I won't let them do that to you," he said softly but fiercely. "We'll make sure it doesn't come to that." Sira stepped back, shaking her head. "But they'll try. They'll keep coming. And if I can't control the bond..." She trailed off, her face filled with worry. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The meaning was clear. Eli's mind raced. He had to act fast. They had to prepare. The soldiers would be back soon, and if they didn't find a way to break the bond, Sira might lose everything. She might lose herself. They had one chance. "We'll find a way," Eli said, more to himself than to her. "We'll break this." He grabbed the pulse grenade and began setting up traps around the cabin again. He worked quickly, hands trembling, heart pounding. Sira helped him, silently but with purpose. There was no time for words now. The ground shook with the rumble of approaching pods. "Eli," Sira said softly, looking out toward the mountains, "I need you to know something." He turned toward her, his face full of worry. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her hands glowing brighter. I know I've been afraid. Afraid of losing myself, of what I was made for. But the bond, it's changing. It's not just their connection anymore. I feel something else. Something different. Eli's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? She looked at him, her eyes filled with something deeper than fear. I feel you, she said softly. I feel everything that you are. I don't want to be just a weapon anymore. I don't want to be theirs. I want to be mine. And I want to be with you. He stepped forward, his breath caught in his throat. Sira, you're more than I ever thought was possible, she continued, her voice cracking. More than I ever knew I could have. Then let's end this, Eli said, determination burning in his eyes. We fight together. The soldiers came, as Sira had known they would. This time, there were more of them. 12 machines in total, armored and glowing, marching toward the cabin in perfect formation. Their eyes glowed red, their weapons raised. They didn't speak, but their presence was enough. We don't have much time, Sira said, her voice shaking slightly. Once they get close enough. Eli nodded. Then we make them regret it. The first soldier was down in seconds. Eli's pulse grenade detonated with a blinding flash, sending a shockwave through the ground. The soldier's body crumpled like paper, its red lights flickering as it hit the snow. Sira moved next, her glowing hands cutting through the next soldier with an energy blast that sent the machine flying into a pile of broken rock. But there were still more. So many more. They circled the cabin, closing in. Their scanners whirred as they processed the scene before them. They knew they couldn't lose this time. Eli fired the shotgun, hitting one soldier square in the chest, but it didn't fall. It kept advancing, its limbs bent, and repaired instantly. The machines were built to withstand anything, even the most devastating blows. Sira stepped forward, her body glowing brighter than ever before. She raised her hands high, sending another blast into the group, her energy surrounding her like a shield. Eli, help me, she shouted. Eli rushed to her side, ready to do whatever it took. But as he moved, he heard the sound of a new hum, an even deeper sound than before. He turned and saw something darker. The final unit. The leader. The one who controlled them all. Its red eyes gleamed with malice as it stepped into the clearing. Sira's face paled. That's him. The one who controls the bond. The machine raised its weapon, preparing to strike. Eli's blood ran cold. There was no way they could fight it head-on. Not like this. But then, a plan formed in his mind. He ran toward the side of the cabin, taking Sira's hand as he passed her. Stay with me. We're doing this together. What? Trust me, Eli shouted. You can't fight him alone. But together, we can. Sira hesitated, then nodded. She followed him into the snow, her energy lighting up the dark sky. The leader saw them running, and it moved to intercept them, its massive arm raised to strike. Sira reached out with both hands, her energy pulsing through the air. As the leader approached, she focused all her energy into a single strike, one powerful burst of light. The ground exploded. When the dust cleared, the leader was down. It was over. Sira fell to her knees, exhausted but alive. Her body flickered with the last of her energy, her hands shaking. The bond was broken. For good. Eli dropped beside her, pulling her into his arms. We did it, he whispered. Sira smiled, her eyes filled with tears. Together. And as the sun began to rise over the horizon, Eli and Sira stood together, knowing they had survived the battle. The war wasn't over, but for now, they had each other. And that was enough.